When we mention credit cards, there's a lot of things that can be said, and not everybody understands them. So that's why I made this video to explain in very few words how it is that those devilish things work. So let's start by explaining the different concepts that they use, which make kind of difficult for people to understand. So let's see. The first thing would be to understand the different dates that they have. The first one would be the end of the month, which doesn't necessarily go with the calendar month. And then we have the due date. Now we mentioned some other generalities that you'll see on your balance of the credit card. One of them would be credit limit. The next thing to mention would be the different amounts that you'll see on your balance. The first one being credit limit. The second one is available. And the total debt. After this, we'll find the different amounts that we have to pay during different days. And those would be minimum not to pay interest, and we'll find the minimum payment. Now let's talk about the different pieces of information that we now have so we can understand completely what a balance of a credit card is like. So the first thing to know would be that the end of the month, according to the bank, isn't necessarily the same one as the calendar month. So for instance, sometimes we'll find something like this. So this would be January and this would be February. But the end of the month would be at some point, let's see, on the 20th, and again here on the 20th. Even though you get your credit balance of January, usually you will get it a couple of days after the cut, which would be the end of the month on January the 20th, and you will get it some days later. And even though it says January, it doesn't cover necessarily the whole month that it has the name on it. The one that you will get for February will cover from the 21st of January until the 20th of February. And you would get it after the 20th of February. Now the due date, which is when you have to pay. Usually the banks give you an approximate of 20 natural days after the end of the month. So if the first end of the month would be on January the 20th, that means you would get it at some point between these days, and you will have an approximate of 20 days after that date so you can pay for it. So that would be that you would have to pay an approximate on the 10th of February. This date is never a suggestion. This is the maximum date that you can pay for your credit card balance. So that would imply that you bought something at the beginning of January, which would be reflected on January the 20th, on the end of the month, and you would have until February the 10th to pay for it. This is somewhat confusing for some people because they believe that they pay on this date, that they clear out entirely the credit card balance, but then by February the 20th, they would get another balance with still some money. The thing is that they're paying for something that they consumed on January the 20th or earlier, not whatever they consumed after that date until the day that they're paying. Now let's talk about the different amounts that appear on your credit balance. So the first one would be the credit limit. This one is set by the bank and it tells you the maximum amount that you can owe at any given point. So this is the maximum amount that you can take from your credit card. Total debt is the amount that you owe at a given point. The difference between the credit limit and the total debt is the amount that you have available. Out of the total credit line that you have with the bank, whatever you have used is your total debt, and the rest would be the available money. Let's talk about the two amounts that appear as minimum payments. So we have two types of minimum payments. The first one would be all of the purchases plus installments. This is all of the payments without interest that are due during this month. And the final amount would be the minimum payment. This one is the minimum amount that you have to pay to the bank in order for you not to fall in default. Meaning, if you keep on paying this amount, you will never have a bad score in the credit bureau in Mexico. What to remember from all of this, and the suggestion would be to buy right after the end of the month, because that way you will have the maximum time for your payment. Now, the due date, as I said before, remember that it's the maximum day that you can pay on. It is never a suggestion. It is not that you can wait until the following day to make the payment, because it is when the banks usually call you and say that you haven't paid. Another thing to consider is that if you make the payment in cash or from your bank account to your credit card from the same bank, it is reflected exactly on the same day. But if you're paying for the credit card from one bank with a transaction from another bank, it is sometimes reflected up to 48 hours later, which would mean that even if you pay on time, it will be reflected 2 days later, which will cause the banks to be calling you because you were late in the payment. So my suggestion would be, if you're gonna pay on the due date, just make sure that you pay 2 days in advance at least, if it is from another bank. My recommendation would be to pay always, every single time, the minimum not to pay interests. Given the case that you do not have the money right away, or that there's an emergency and you need it for something else, make sure that you pay at least your minimum payment. That way, you are going to protect your credit score. So this would be all for the dates, amounts, and minimum payments in your credit card. I'll show some more tricks and tips in the following videos. Make sure you click subscribe and hit the bell button.